asked, which you feel it would not be appropriate to answer, please don't hesitate to indicate, and that will be understood. Could I call upon Ms. Baer to ask a question? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for being with us, for sharing your testimony. As far as I understood, neither UK courts nor the European Court of Human Rights got any final decision in your case. On the one hand, I would like very personally to know how this feels for you, and on the other case, I would like to know whether you have any suggestions systematically, legally, how cases like yours could really be settled in a legal system that works correctly and properly.
After 14 years detained in the UK, including over 5 years in a maximum security prison, and facing a 175-year sentence, with the prospect of years more in prison before being able to have a shot at the European Court of Human Rights, I accepted a plea offer from the United States that would release me from prison immediately. The United States insisted that I not be allowed to take a case in relation to what had happened to me in relation to its extradition proceedings, nor that I could even file a Freedom of Information Act request on the US government to see what was done. There will never be a hearing into what has happened, and that's why it's so important that Pace acts. The uncertainty within Europe as to the defences that can be used by journalists here to protect themselves from transnational repression and extradition, if left in its current state, will inevitably be abused by other states. So norm-setting institutions like Pace must move to make the situation clear that what happened to me cannot happen again.
Thank you. Ms. Novica.
Mr. Assange, it is great to have you today at the committee meeting. In fact, I don't want to ask about the past, more or less, but past is still the current.
Not past.
Yeah, it's not finished yet, of course. But I wanted to ask you whether you believe that our proceedings here in the Council of Europe, in case and hopefully the report prepared by Suna Evarsdottir is going to be accepted at the plenary session, that will reverse the negative impact that your case had on the position of whistleblowers and the right to expression globally, that really you hope for, that in case the report is going to be accepted, and your visit here to Parliament will, in a way, have this positive aspect and will improve the situation in this regard of the rights of journalists and so on. But but also I would like to add how you visualize your life now after your case. I'm not asking very much about your private plans, but in general, what do you think, what you are planning to do, basically? Thank you.
Well, I think that I am here because I believe it is an essential first step for Pace to act. to get the ball rolling, to address the problems of transnational repression, and also to make it clear that national security journalism is possible within European borders. As for my readaptation to the big wide world outside of house arrest, an embassy siege, and maximum security prison, it sure takes some adjustment. It's not simply the spooky sound of electric cars. They are very spooky. But it is also the change in the society. Where we once produced where we once released important war crimes videos that stirred public debate. Now, every day, there are live stream horrors from the wars in Ukraine and the war in Gaza. Hundreds of journalists have been killed in Gaza and Ukraine combined. The impunity seems to mount, and it is still uncertain what we can do about it. My readaptation to the world, of course, includes some positive but still tricky things. Becoming a father again to children who have grown up without me. Becoming a husband again. Even dealing with a mother-in-law. These are trying family issues. No, she's a very lovely woman. I like her very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Assange. Could I call upon Mr. Kleinwacher, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Back to a sadder issue. How well, in your experience, does political asylum really work in today's world?
Political asylum is an absolutely essential relief valve for human rights abuses within states. That people can leave a state that is persecuting them not only saves individual lives, it provides a mechanism where journalists can continue to report on their societies after they have been hounded out. Ultimately, the threat of people leaving a state is what, in the final analysis, controls its behavior. We have seen examples in history of states that made it difficult or impossible for people to leave. And we can see how the situation for people living there collapsed. There must be competition between states to be good places for people to live and to work. The assault on asylum through means of transnational repression is another matter. In my case, it was difficult to find a state that would give asylum that I was able to get to. There is a big gap in the asylum system for people who are not fleeing their own state, but fleeing an ally of that state, or any third state. That was my case. asylum law does not easily cover the case where, say, an Australian is fleeing persecution by the United States. Or we could imagine a Kazakhstani fleeing persecution by Russia or China. I was not able to apply for asylum within the UK. Of course, the UK has its own particular political angle. It might have been difficult to convince the courts to give me, or in fact anyone, asylum in relation to the United States and the UK. But there wasn't even a chance, because citizens from third states under the 1951 Convention, as it's implemented in most European states, cannot apply for asylum.
Thank you, Mr. Assange. Mr. Honko, would you like to ask a question, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Assange. I'm so happy to see you here, to see Stella as well, and thank you for reminding what Pace did in the last 4 years, starting with the hearing we had in January 2020 with your father, John Shipton, with Niels Melzer, the UN General Rapporteur on torture, and very important other persons. And 3 times I think this assembly made a clear position calling for the prompt release. And I think this assembly can a bit be proud of it, because it failed in other international state organizations. There were attempts as well in the European Union Parliament, in the OSCE, but none of those could had enough courage to make a clear statement.
Not enough geopolitical diversity.
Sorry?
Perhaps not enough geopolitical diversity.
Maybe. So I'm very happy. Maybe a question on the extra juridical repression you talked about in the end, because this is one of the most shocking for me, that there is a law in the US on freedom of speech, which is not for other citizens, but there are laws that can be applied to other citizens. What could we do as Parliamentary Assembly or as Council of Europe, of European states, to counter this?
Thank you, Mr. Hunke. Mr. Assange.
In the final UK High Court case, which I won and the US appealed against, I won under the basis of nationality discrimination. That is, in the UK Extradition Act, you're not meant to discriminate at trial or during a penalty phase against someone on the basis of their nationality. The US tried different tricks to get around that in the UK system, and it was uncertain whether I or the United States would ultimately prevail. However, there is nothing in the European Charter that prevents nationality discrimination in relation to extradition. So this is a small protection. It was hard to use within the UK Extradition Act. But it's not clear that it exists in most European states.
Thank you. Ms. Mikkonen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Assange, that you are here. Pace has done work on transnational repression, where states go after someone in another state. In this case, in your case, there are these very troubling allegations about the CIA monitoring and even considering assassination. Can you comment more on those? And how do you yourself see your status? Were you a political prisoner?
The first part of your question was about the CIA. The second part was about, do I see myself as a political prisoner? Answering the first one first, yes, I was a political prisoner. The political basis for the US government's retributive acts against me was in relation to publishing the truth about what the US government had done. Then in a formal legal sense, once the US proceeded with its legal retribution, it used the Espionage Act, a classic political offense. In relation to the CIA's campaign of transnational repression against WikiLeaks, we felt that something was going on at the time. There were many small signs that came together, but having an ominous feeling and some subtly put tips from a whistleblower in one of the security contractors that the CIA had contracted didn't give me the full and disturbing picture which later emerged. It is an interesting example where an intelligence organization has targeted an investigative organization, WikiLeaks. As a result of our investigations, a criminal case in Spain, and in particular work done by US journalists, which under the precedent that has been established in my case might well now be themselves criminal, detailed information about the actions that the CIA took came out. Those details involved the testimony of more than 30 current or former US intelligence officials. There are two resulting processes: a criminal case in Spain with a number of victims, including my wife, my son, people who came to visit me at the embassy, lawyers, journalists, and a civil suit in the United States against the CIA. In the United States, the CIA has, in response to that civil suit, declared formally by the CIA director and the Attorney General state secrets privilege to knock out the case. The claim is that the CIA may have a defense, but that defense is classified. And so that the civil case cannot go forward. So it's complete impunity within the US system.
Thank you. Mr. Rakan, could I invite you to ask a question?
Mr. Assange, if you could go back in time, would you do everything the same? And if not, what would you do differently? I'm not asking just in the terms of personal cost that you suffered, but also in terms of effectiveness or impact of what you tried to do. Thank you.
This is a very deep question about free will. Why do people do things when they do them? Looking back, we were often constrained by our resources, the number of staff, by secrecy that was necessary to protect our sources. If I could go back and have a lot of extra resources, of course, political approaches, media approaches could have maximized even further the impact of the revelations that we made. But I suppose your question is trying to say, well, were there any knobs that could be turned in hindsight? Of course, thousands of small things. I was not from the United Kingdom. I had a good friend in the United Kingdom, Gavin McFadden, who was an American journalist, a very good man. But it took me time to, once I was trapped in the United Kingdom, it took me time to understand what UK society was about, who you could trust, who you couldn't trust, the different types of maneuvers that are made in that society. There are different media partners that perhaps we could have chosen differently.
Thank you. Mr. Chope, could I invite you to address the question?
You were the subject of a European arrest warrant issued by Sweden. To what extent do you think that European arrest warrants are being used as tools of repression? And to what extent do you think the rules can be changed so that they can no longer be used for that purpose?
The European arrest warrant system was introduced post-September 11 with the political rationale that it would be used for the fast transfer of Muslim terrorists between European states. The first European arrest warrant that was issued by Sweden for a drunk driver. We must understand that when we pick a disfavored group, Muslims at that time, and say, well, this repressive legislation, it's only going to be for them. Inevitably, bureaucrats, elements of the security state will seize upon those measures and apply them more broadly. Injustice to one person spreads soon enough to most people. I don't know the statistics on how often arrest warrants are abused. There was an attempt to extradite me without any charge from the United Kingdom by Sweden. The UK government subsequently changed the law to prevent extradition without charge. But in its amendment to the extradition legislation, it included a rider to make sure that it didn't apply to me.